The Epping Asylum Hotel scandal, when government lawyers turn against British communities. Right then, before we dive into what might be the most shocking display of governmental contempt for British communities I've witnessed in years, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you about Yvette Cooper, the Home Office, and the absolute shambles in Epping will make your blood boil, and you'll want to stay informed about every twist in this unfolding disaster. Picture this: a quiet Essex town called Epping. Children walking to school past a hotel that's become the epicenter of community fear. Parents frantically calling their MP because they are genuinely terrified for their children's safety. And what does the Labour government do? Their own lawyers stand up in court and essentially declare that the rights of asylum seekers matter more than the safety and concerns of British families. More than the safety of British children. Let that sink in for a moment. The Bell Hotel in Epping has become ground zero for everything that's wrong with this country's approach to immigration. We're not talking about some remote location tucked away from civilization. This hotel sits right next to a school. A school where children are trying to get an education whilst their parents lose sleep, worrying about alleged sexual and physical assaults happening meters from playground. Dr. Neil Hudson, the local MP, didn't mince his words when he addressed Parliament. This man was visibly emotional, describing a tinderbox situation where his community is in distress. And can you blame them? The Bell Hotel has been plagued with allegations of sexual and physical assaults. There are twice-weekly major protests, some turning violent, with police officers getting injured trying to maintain order. This isn't peaceful dissent. This is a community push to breaking point. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. When Epping Forest District Council fought tooth and nail to get a court injunction to close this hotel, what happened? The Home Office's lawyers argued, and I quote, that the rights of asylum seekers are more important than the concerns of the local community. They actually stood up in a British court and said that the worries of British citizens, the safety of British children, the peace of British neighborhoods, all of that comes second to housing people who, let's be frank, shouldn't be here in the first place. Now, Yvette Cooper tried to backtrack when challenged in Parliament. She claimed this characterization was wrong, that there's no hierarchy of rights. But the legal documents don't lie, do they? Her own government's barristers made the case crystal clear. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, let me quote the Home Office's own legal submission. The relevant public interests in play are not equal and are fundamentally different in nature. They went on to explain that whilst Epping represents the public interest that exists in planning control in its local area, the Home Secretary represents the public interest of the whole United Kingdom. The arrogance is breathtaking. Apparently, the safety and well-being of actual British communities is merely a local planning matter, whilst housing illegal immigrants is a matter of national importance. The legal machinations get even more sinister. Edward Brown KC, representing the Home Office, told the Court of Appeal that housing asylum seekers was in the national interest. Meanwhile, the Council's barrister, Robin Green, pointed out that circumstances on the ground changed as demonstrations began. By July, what might have been acceptable in May was no longer bearable, he said. But did the Home Office care? Not one jot. And here's the kicker, if you'll allow me to get properly angry for a moment. When the council finally managed to secure a temporary injunction requiring the hotel to be emptied by September 12th, what did the Home Office do? They appealed. They fought tooth and nail to keep this hotel open, despite the community distress, despite the alleged assaults, despite children having to walk past this chaos every day to get to school. The Court of Appeal judge, Lord Justice Bean, made some rather pointed observations about the council's tactics, suggesting they'd employed unfair tactics in seeking the injunction. But you know what's truly unfair? A government that prioritizes the comfort of asylum seekers over the safety of British families. A system that's been, as Robert Jenrick put it, turned against the British people. Subscribe to UK Connors if you want the unvarnished truth about what's happening in our politics, because mainstream media won't tell you the full story. Let's talk about the sheer incompetence and contempt displayed here. The hotel had been housing asylum seekers since February 2025. The council knew this. The Home Office had even confirmed in May that no planning application was required. But it wasn't until November, almost 9 months later, that legal action became a possibility. Why? Because that's how long it took for the community to reach breaking point. The legal submissions reveal the government's true priorities with stunning clarity. They argue that granting the injunction could create a precedent that would have a serious impact on the Secretary of State's ability to house vulnerable people. Vulnerable people. That's how they describe individuals who've allegedly committed sexual and physical assaults in a community hotel next to a school. But the most damning aspect of this entire affair is how the government's lawyers characterize community concerns. According to their submission, the fear among locals stemmed from very few instances and shouldn't lead to any rational conclusion that asylum seekers have a higher tendency toward criminal behavior. This is gaslighting on an industrial scale. When your community is experiencing alleged sexual assaults and violence, when parents are afraid to send their children to school, that's not irrational fear. That's a perfectly reasonable response to genuine threats. The financial aspect adds another layer of cynicism to this story. Piers Riley-Smith, representing Simone Hotels, claimed that asylum seekers were a lifeline for the business. The hotel's occupancy rate for paying guests in August 2022 was just 1%. So we have a failing business being propped up by taxpayer money to house asylum seekers against the express wishes of the local community. It's corporate welfare with a social justice veneer. The government position becomes even more indefensible when you consider their legal argument about hardship to asylum seekers if they had to be relocated. Let me get this straight. The hardship of moving asylum seekers to alternative accommodation outweighs the hardship experienced by British families living in fear? The hardship of disrupting asylum seekers' temporary housing arrangements is more significant than the hardship of children unable to walk safely to school? This case exposes a fundamental contempt that our governing class has for ordinary British people. When push comes to shove, when British families are genuinely afraid, when local communities are in distress, the government's response is to lawyer up and argue that foreign nationals have superior rights to British citizens in their own country. The European Convention on Human Rights gets dragged into this, of course. The Home Office claimed their obligation was a reflection of the United Kingdom's commitments under Article 3 ECHR, which establishes non-derogable basic human rights. But what about the basic human rights of British children to walk to school without fear? What about the basic human rights of British families to feel safe in their own communities? Robert Jenrick's response cut to the heart of the matter. The Court of Appeal decided the public interest was in keeping illegal migrants in housing, while the harms of Epping residents were disregarded. He noted that the system even urges councils and the police to control local demonstrations rather than putting an end to the use of hotels housing unlawful immigrants. Make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors because we're the only channel giving you the full picture of how badly our political class has failed us. This isn't just about one hotel in Essex. This is about a government that has completely inverted its priorities. Instead of protecting British communities, they are protecting the arrangements that endanger those communities. Instead of listening to genuine concern from constituents, they are dismissing them as irrational prejudice. Instead of putting British interests first, they are putting international obligations and progressive political correctness ahead of basic public safety. The Epping Forest District Council, to their credit, isn't giving up. They vowed to continue the fight and take the matter to the Supreme Court if necessary. But the fact that a local council has to fight their own government to protect their constituents from alleged sexual predators tells you everything you need to know about the state of modern Britain. The broader implications are terrifying. If the Home Office can successfully argue in court that asylum seekers' rights supersede community safety concerns, what's to stop them from opening similar facilities next to schools across the country? What's to stop them from dismissing any community objections as mere local planning disputes that pale in comparison to their international humanitarian obligations? This case has set a precedent that community safety concerns are secondary to asylum accommodation needs. It's established that parents' fears for their children's well-being are less important than avoiding inconvenience to asylum seekers. It's confirmed that British families must simply accept whatever arrangements the government deems necessary, regardless of the impact on their daily lives and safety. The saddest part of this entire affair is Dr. Hudson's emotional plea to Parliament. Here's an MP, visibly upset, describing his constituents' genuine distress, begging the Home Secretary to do the right and safe thing by closing the hotel immediately. And what does he get? Legal technicalities, bureaucratic deflection, and a system that's fundamentally rigged against the people he represents. Yvette Cooper's attempt to distance herself from her own lawyer's arguments is perhaps the most pathetic aspect of this story. She stands there telling MPs that the characterization is wrong whilst her own legal team is simultaneously arguing exactly that position in court. It's political cowardice of the highest order, trying to have it both ways, refusing to take responsibility for the positions her own department is advancing. The timing couldn't be more cynical either. Children returning to school, parents already anxious about their safety, and the government chooses this moment to fight for the right to keep a problematic asylum hotel open right next to the school gates. It's almost as if they are deliberately trying to maximize community distress. This story perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with modern Britain. We have a government more concerned with international opinion than domestic safety. We have lawyers arguing that British communities must simply endure whatever arrangements suit the government's asylum policies. We have a system where expressing legitimate safety concerns gets you labeled as prejudice, whilst actual allegations of assault get dismissed as statistically insignificant. The Bell Hotel controversy isn't an isolated incident. It's a symbol. It represents a government that's lost touch with its primary duty to protect its own citizens. It represents a legal system that's been captured by international human rights law at the expense of basic common sense. It represents a political class that views ordinary British concerns as obstacles to be overcome rather than legitimate interests to be protected. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. This isn't really about immigration policy. It's about democracy itself. When a government can successfully argue in court that the concerns of British voters are less important than the convenience of non-citizens, we've crossed a line that threatens the very foundation of representative government. So there you have it, the Epping Asylum Hotel scandal in all its shameful detail. A government that lawyers up against its own people, a Home Secretary who won't stand behind her own legal team's arguments, and a community abandoned by the very institutions that are supposed to protect them. If this doesn't make you angry, if this doesn't make you demand better from our politicians, then frankly, you're not paying attention. Hit that subscribe button, share this video, and let's make sure stories like this don't disappear down the memory hole, because accountability starts with awareness, and awareness starts with you.